The lioness Nala had mourned the loss of her cub, or so everyone thought. But when the team discovered the impossible truth, buried beneath a pile of hay, a second cub, alive, barely breathing, was hidden by her desperate instincts. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The following morning shattered that assumption. When Jessica returned at dawn, the sanctuary was blanketed in a hush that seemed unnatural, even for morning. Birds perched silently above the lion enclosure. The usual rhythmic grunt of the warthogs, the chatter of monkeys, even the whirring of the automatic feeders, muted. It was as if the entire sanctuary had paused, holding its breath with her. Jessica approached the den, coffee forgotten in her hand. Nala was still in the same place, her massive body curled tightly around nothing, as if protecting the ghost of her cub. Her ribs rose and fell in shallow, measured breaths. The hay beneath her was flattened and slightly damp. But it wasn't sleep. It was vigil. She didn't respond to Jessica's presence, didn't even flick her ears at the sound of the enclosure gate unlatching. Only her eyes moved, briefly, when Jessica knelt beside the reinforced mesh. They were dull, vacant, but simmering with something darker than sorrow. Not rage, not confusion. It was closer to despair, a quiet resignation that had no place in the eyes of a predator. Jessica swallowed hard. "Nala, girl," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Come on, you have to eat." But Nala didn't move. By midday, concern turned into alarm. Nala hadn't touched the raw meat placed just outside her reach. She ignored the water. She ignored the sun that crawled across the stones, warming her fur as it moved over her enclosure. She ignored everything. Word spread fast through the sanctuary staff, not just that Nala was grieving, but that she was giving up. Even Mike's skepticism faded by the end of the day. He stood quietly beside Jessica, watching the lioness from a distance. "She's not eating," he murmured. "She's not even responding to stimulus. That's not normal. That's something else." Jessica nodded grimly. "She's not just mourning. She's waiting." "For what?" Jessica didn't answer. The lump in her throat made it impossible. By dusk, Jessica made the call to the veterinary team. Sedation was discussed, force feeding, rehydration. But everything felt like a violation, because somehow, despite every scientific explanation in their textbooks, what they were witnessing wasn't biology. It was heartbreak, and heartbreak didn't follow protocol. Jessica's fingers trembled as she flipped through the printouts from the birthing records, pages rustling in the dim glow of her desk lamp. The images from the ultrasound were grainy, indistinct to the untrained eye, but she had stared at enough of them over the years to know what she was seeing. 2 separate pulses, rhythmic and strong. One near Nala's ribs, the other lower, nestled in the curve of her belly. Twin heartbeats. There had been 2. There had always been 2. So where was the second cub? The official notes had been hastily written. A stressful labor, a difficult birth, 1 cub, born small and unresponsive. No mention of a second. Jessica leaned back in her chair, heartbeat loud in her ears. Could the second have been stillborn? Undelivered? Reabsorbed even? All possibilities, yes. All medically plausible. But something about Nala's behavior gnawed at her rational mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. Back at the enclosure, Nala was no longer simply waiting. She was tending. She brought food to the crib, tearing strips from the morning's offering and laying them beside the makeshift bedding. She licked the stone clean around it, clearing away flecks of blood and straw. And she purred, deep, melodic, a resonance that vibrated against the glass like a heartbeat of its own. That sound no longer felt like mourning. It felt like communication. Jessica stood at the edge of the viewing deck, clipboard forgotten at her side. She watched Nala curl herself around the nest again, slow and deliberate, her massive frame forming a wall of protection. Her eyes, once glazed with grief, now flickered with eerie awareness. Not madness, not hallucination. Conviction. Mike joined her, frowning at the scene. "She's playing house with a ghost." Jessica didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was locked on the lioness's face, on the subtle way her ears twitched toward the crib, as if listening for the tiniest sound. On the way, her paw gently hovered over the empty straw, careful not to press too hard. There was tenderness in every movement, precision, as if something fragile truly lay beneath her. "She doesn't think the cub is dead," Jessica said at last, her voice barely audible. Mike scoffed, but it lacked conviction. "You think she's sensing something we missed?" Jessica's answer was a whisper, heavy with dread. "I think we all missed something." Because whatever had happened in that birthing den, whatever the staff had overlooked or explained away, Nala hadn't. And now she was guarding not just an absence, but a secret. The sterile smell of antiseptic stung Jessica's nose as she worked in the dimly lit emergency clinic. Her hands moved swiftly, but every motion felt deliberate, as if the world around her had slowed to match the fragile pulse of the cub she cradled in her palms. The little one, so small, so impossibly delicate, had yet to open his eyes, but Jessica could feel the faintest tremor of life in his tiny chest. Every eddy heartbeat, every breath was a victory, fragile as the first spark of a flame in a storm. "Jessica," the voice of Dr. Hannah Bates cut through the heavy silence. She was examining the cub's limbs, her brow furrowed with concern. "The dehydration is severe. We need to be cautious with rehydration. If we go too fast, we risk shock." Jessica nodded without looking up, her focus solely on the cub's face. His lips were tinged blue, the color of someone caught between life and death. But there was something in the way his tiny nostrils flared in rhythmic intervals, a sound that almost mimicked the soft, shallow purring Nala had made. The connection between mother and child, even in absence, was still there. She gently set the cub back down on the sterile examination table, her hands trembling slightly as she worked to heat the IV fluid. It was like holding a breath, one that could vanish at any moment if they weren't careful. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice tight, the question lingering in the air like an unspoken fear. Hannah sighed, glancing at the heart rate monitor that beeped steadily. "We're on borrowed time. His chances of survival, they're slim. He's too young, too weak." Jessica refused to accept that. She couldn't. She'd seen the signs, the way Nala had instinctively known. The lioness had cradled him in her protective silence, her instinct guiding her where the trained eyes of humans had failed. She hadn't mourned. She hadn't been delusional. She had been guarding what was hers. And now, that unspoken bond pulsed beneath Jessica's skin, a tether she couldn't deny. "There has to be something we can do," Jessica murmured, her gaze never leaving the tiny cub's fragile form. "Something we're missing." Hannah glanced at her, her expression hardening with a kind of quiet determination. "You're not giving up on him." "No," Jessica whispered fiercely. "I'm not." As the night stretched on, they worked in tandem, each moment marked by the steady rise and fall of the cub's chest, a reminder of the razor-thin line between life and death. Jessica's thoughts kept drifting back to Nala, to the way the lioness had instinctively protected what others believed was gone, buried under a cloak of mourning. The cub may have disappeared from their eyes, but not from Nala's. And now it was up to them to bring him back. Every step felt like it held the weight of Nala's silent hope. And as the hours stretched into dawn, Jessica could only pray that the cub would survive long enough to feel the warmth of his mother's embrace once again. The morning light filtered through the high windows of the clinic, casting soft shadows on the walls, as if nature itself held its breath. The cub, Miracle, as they had named him, lay under the warmth of a gentle heat lamp, his chest rising and falling in slow, fragile rhythm. Jessica stood at the observation window, her face pressed against the cool glass, eyes tracing every minuscule movement of his tiny form. Miracle had made it through the night, against all odds a fragile pulse of life that no one had expected to see. Weak, yes, but alive. His tiny frame quivered with the effort to breathe, but the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest told a story no one could ignore. She turned her gaze to Nala, her heart clenched tight with a mixture of relief and awe. The lioness was pacing relentlessly in her enclosure. The constant, restless motion of her powerful legs, the flick of her tail, the anxious twitch of her ears at every sound. She was on the edge, as if she could feel every breath of her cub through the thin walls that separated them. It was instinct, an unspoken bond that was deeper than the physical distance between them. Nala knew he was out there. Nala knew he had made it. The door to the clinic opened, and Jessica felt a jolt in her chest as the veterinary team gently wheeled Miracle's incubator toward the exit. They were ready to reunite mother and cub. Nala's pace quickened, the powerful rhythm of her feet quickening with every step they took toward her. The doors to her enclosure slid open, and the cub was carefully placed on the straw bedding in the corner within reach of Nala's watchful gaze. And then, silence. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no triumphant roars, no loud growls of excitement. The moment was quiet, almost reverent, marked only by the soft purrs that rumbled from Nala's chest as she slowly approached. Her eyes never left Miracle, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she feared disturbing the fragile life that had just been returned to her. She nudged him gently with her nose, testing him, and then, as if the years of instinct had simply kicked in, Nala curled her massive, powerful body around the tiny cub. Her large head lowered, and the rhythmic motions of grooming began. Each soft lick over his tiny body seemed to breathe life back into him, as if every stroke was an offering, a promise of warmth, protection, and the bond they shared. Jessica watched, her heart swelling as she stood at the glass. Tears threatened, but she fought them back. Nala had never faltered. She hadn't just waited for her cub to return. She had waited for them to see what she had always known. Miracle was never truly gone. He had been hidden in plain sight, safeguarded by his mother's instincts, by her fierce, undying love. Mike stood a few feet behind her, his face softened, the typical smirk wiped away by the profound truth of the scene. "I didn't believe animals could feel that kind of love," he said quietly, the words almost reverent. Jessica blinked, a shaky breath escaping her. She smiled, her eyes misty with the weight of it all. "She didn't just feel it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She knew he was alive, and she waited for us to believe her." In that moment, the cub, so fragile, so impossibly small, lay nestled in the warmth of his mother's embrace. It was a silent promise, one that neither time nor distance could ever sever. They had come back together, just as Nala had always known they would.